everyone, I'm back again, here to make my second video. And before I begin, I want to say a big thank you to everyone who took the time to watch my video and to provide some feedback and help guide me as to what I can focus on and what I should talk more about. And hopefully in this next game, I can answer a few of those questions. So let's go ahead and find a 10-minute game. And for those of you who are wondering, at least on this account that I use, my classical rating is about 2018, but that varies whenever I do play these games. But generally I'm hovering in all categories for bullet, blitz, and classical around the 2000 rating at Lichess. Just 1 second. Alright. So we're playing CrushOverite, who is a 1368 player. And one of the things that I was told that I can do is actually control the color of the arrows that show up. And I have no idea how to do that, so let's just play around and see. Okay, so if I hold shift, I can make a red arrow. If I hold control, green. Alt is blue. Wonderful. Okay, so my opponent played e4. I responded with c6, going into a Caro-Kann. And now I'll play d5. And let's see if they exchange. So they would capture here, and I would capture there. And we'd have maybe an exchange variation. But perhaps more typical of what you'll see is a knight coming to c3 first. And then I would capture on the e4 square, and they would recapture with their knight on the e4 square. So one of the questions that I got was that kind of what books have I read, how do I study chess, and kind of just a little bit more information about myself. So as I said, I had started playing chess around 2012-2013 time frame. And I think one of my very first books was this mammoth book of chess, and it was kind of like it covered everything. It had all the information that you could want on chess, and it had kind of all of the openings and defenses for like king's pawn and queen's pawn games, as well as like attack and defense, some strategy like that. And to be quite honest, it was probably a little bit more than what I needed when I was first starting out. And one of the other first chess books that I got that I really found useful in terms of the information it provided was My System by Aaron Nimzovich. And that was very insightful in terms of kind of beginning chess strategy. And I'm sure many of the concepts went directly over my head. And I'm sure there'd be a wealth of knowledge to be gained if I were to return back to that book. So what's going on here in the game before I talk a little bit more about myself? We had the exchange occur on the e4 square, and I recaptured and they recaptured with their bishop. I'm hitting their bishop now with my knight, so you see my knight is attacking there. However, their queen now has come down to defend. Instead of just swapping off their bishop, I prefer to open up some lines or continue my development. So I could, let's say, just trade my knight for their bishop, and then they would recapture with their queen, but I have other options available to myself, such as developing this bishop, say here, which isn't actually hitting anything, but it will get outside of my pawn chain once I do eventually push this pawn to e6. And the reason that would be good is because this bishop, when a pawn is here, if it's not outside the pawn chain, it's effectively being blocked in, if you look at the pawn structure. So that's one idea I'm considering. I'm sure another move that is available to me would simply be to push g6 with the idea of fianchettoing my bishop to g7. So I think I will just try and get my bishop outside of the bishop, out of the pawn chain, out of the pawn structure before I close it up. And let's see how they respond to that. So in terms of how I study, I really actually, more than even playing chess, I enjoy just reading over Grandmaster games. And so I have Bobby Fischer's, I think it's called like 60 Most Memorable Games. I really enjoyed reading that a lot. And as well, I had Alekhine's games, his best games. And I got, I forget, the Zurich 1953. I think that's like a classic that they talk about. I had that book, and I really like just to read over those games and kind of see the analysis of grandmasters and how they play. So what's going on here? White has come with their bishop to g5. They're now pinning my knight. And now here's kind of something that some people at the lower rating are inclined to do, but they really should strive not to do. And that is they're moving pieces multiple times. So you see in chess, tempo or time is one of the important factors. And how quickly you can develop will affect how soon you can either launch your attack or who's going to gain the initiative. So if you move a piece twice, first by going here and then moving it back here, you effectively take 2 moves to do what you could have done in 1. Now in some cases you will move a piece twice. However, in general, you want to avoid moving a piece multiple times. Really focus on your development, and then once you have all your pieces developed, then you can begin to consider launching an attack. So I'm just going to continue developing with bishop to e7. I just want to go back and see if I missed something. I could have actually moved my queen here on this move 7 to give check to the king, but everything would be okay after the bishop moves back. So I wouldn't have actually won the piece. But that is one thing I just kind of saw. Fix that. And besides for reading over Grandmaster games, I really have taken to tactics training, both as book form and in terms of online. So chesstempo.com is a really great resource if you want to practice doing your tactics. So now let's see, we might have that previous tactic available to us. So now we have this idea, and I'm sorry my colored arrows are all wonky, but it'll improve with time. Let's say they just do some nothing move. Let's just say hypothetically they move a3. I could then capture knight to e5, and after the pawn captures, I can then bring my queen out to a5 check, and however they guard, I can then swing over and recapture that pawn. So it's always important to look at like color complexes. So my queen can move along the dark square diagonals, and then kind of will be able to eye this entire 5th rank. Okay, so it looks like that tactic will be working out. Let's just do a quick double check to make sure I'm not missing anything. And so I'm going to capture here with a knight. I guess tactically it's not fully working out because they can in the end just move their queen here. So perhaps it won't work out as I planned, but even that will in fact work still, because after the queen moves here, I can then move my bishop here and I'll win their queen. So everything is still a-okay. Alright, and now I'm going to win that pawn. But one thing to note is that by taking the time to win this pawn, I am allowing white to develop. So now that queen check allowed the knight to come here, and then I swung over and took the pawn, but now black can castle. Alright, so let's take a second to see what moves are available to us. I don't see any tactical shots which I can use to win any material. So with that, I obviously need to now retreat my queen. And so we have to ask ourselves, what squares can we move our queen to? Well, obviously I can't move to this square here, or here, 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 because those are all threatened in some capacity. So if I want to move my queen, it needs to be either to this square here, this square, this square, this one, or that square. And in considering which square is best, you also have to consider the future threats that you can make. So this, if I move, let's say, to here or here, that would allow me some scope along the 5th rank. But let's say I moved to the d6 square. That would maybe signal that I'm interested in trading queens and simplifying a little bit. Whereas I'm wanting to make it a little bit more complicated for my opponent, so I want to move back to c7, maybe with the idea of castling and then bringing my rook over to d8 so that it hits at the queen. So what do I think white should do in this position? Well, probably I think that they should castle and get their king to a little bit of safety. And I think I'll do the same. One thing to notice here is that this knight, if it were to hop into this square, would then be attacking here along with the bishop and the queen. So I do need to consider that threat, although I think it is well met by my knight, who is guarding the h7 square, and then after I castle, my king on g8 will also be guarding that square. So I don't think I'm in too much trouble there. And if we were to take a look at our positions and try to compare them and see perhaps who has the better position and why, well, what we should look at is, I guess, pawns to see if there are any weaknesses, or, well, piece placement and king safety. So what I see here is that, well, their king is a little bit weakened because they moved this f pawn to f4. So it's not as safe as it could be. It's kind of subject to potential checks along the a7 to g2, g1 square. And I'm just going to move this here because I don't think it's a big threat. And before this pawn move, I thought it was actually poorly placed, this knight here on the h file, because a typical maxim that they say is that a knight on the rim is dim, because a knight on the rim doesn't have much scope. So you can see that, for example, a knight here is attacking at all of these squares. Whereas, let's say this knight that was here, well, it's only attacking on these squares here. So you see it's much limited in scope. So that's why a knight that is placed centrally will have a much broader attacking range. And typically, for the most part, you want to avoid placing your knight on the edge of the board. Now here, it seems very likely that white is going to lose a piece because I'm hitting the knight, which is guarded here with my pawn, but also my knight here is hitting at the bishop. So if this knight moves, I can just recapture the bishop, and obviously the queen will not give itself up for that bishop, and I'll have won a clean piece. One thing to note as well is a consequence of white weakening this diagonal here is that I can now give check with my queen here. The king will have to move, and then I could pick up the pawn on b2, but maybe I'm not so interested in that because then the rook can come to the open file with tempo. So this rook, or let's choose a different sort, this rook can move with tempo and hit at this pawn. I really gotta improve upon my colored arrows. So let's take a second to figure this out, because this is actually a little bit complex. Let's say that I take the knight here, the knight recaptures, then they're definitely threatening some potential mates if I were to ever move this knight, and I have to be aware of that. But I think I can deal with that consequence. So let's say I take the knight, and then they take this knight with check. Then I can recapture with my bishop. And I'm still up a piece. So let's go ahead, and also let's try and play a little bit quicker. So I think this kind of sortie that white's trying to do with a tactical assault is not going to be working out to their favor, but it's up to me to prove that. And one way I might be able to do that is, let's bring the rook out first, hit at the queen. Now we're forcing the queen away from the square protecting the knight. So this square is guarded, this square is attacked or guarded by that pawn, and this square is also guarded. So now the queen has to move away from this diagonal and break communication with the bishop. And so once the queen moves away, I can pretty safely recapture with the knight, unless the queen moves here. Then there are some tactical shots because exactly. Alright, but I'm a little pressed for time, so they'll take here, and then I'm going to take the g5 knight. Alright. So notice the rook and the queen are both bearing down on the f7 square, but I'm also applying pressure to this square with my rook and my knight. Okay. Sorry if my commentary goes a little bit to the wayside. Just want to make sure I don't lose on time. I'm just looking to see what ideas white might be having in mind. I'm going for this pawn, but they can win back the pawn just by doing that. I might come here threatening this pawn here, or I might just drop my queen to c3 with the idea of bringing my rook up. Okay, so now let's just take it. And I need to be a little bit careful. So this is a weak point for me. The queen can come here giving check. I might just... Okay, that actually got very close and down to the wire. So one of the suggestions I had is to play slightly longer time controls. And I think probably I could definitely look into doing that, maybe playing some 15-minute games, as well as I think probably the background of who I am kind of slowed down my ability to analyze what's going on. Yeah, as I said in some of my response to you guys, actually, it's quite a unique skill to be able to think and verbalize what you intend to do. So streaming is a whole different beast than just actually playing, and it takes up a lot more mental resources. It's quite interesting. If you guys have never tried to make a video, I would highly recommend it. So I'm using this XSplitter broadcaster, and it's a free software, and you should try and play a game and record yourself. And if nothing else, you can verbalize what your moves are out loud, what you think your opponent's going to be doing, and see how well it matches up with what occurs. And then when the game concludes, you can go back and kind of analyze your own game with a video. So kind of using technology to help you improve. Well, I hope you guys got something out of this video. And in the future, I can try and start playing longer time controls as well as focusing more on the game at hand. Maybe practice a little bit with these colored arrows so I'm not using every different color. Please provide me any feedback or anything you'd like to see, and I'll do my best to help with, I guess, answer any questions or meet whatever kind of game style you'd like to see played. And if you have any questions about chess in general, I'd be glad to help you if I can. Alright, thank you.